Okay, just by way of introduction, my name is Jeff Anderson, and to my left here is one of the attorneys that has been working with me and us and the Courageous Survivors, Trusha Goffe, G-O-F-F-E, first name Trusha, T-R-U-S-H-A. Today, as you know, the Ramsey County attorney negotiated a resolution of the criminal and their civil case with the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. And first it needs to be said that happened and was able to happen because of the courage of the survivors of Curtis Waymeyer and all the other survivors who have been coming forward and breaking the silence and bringing information to us under the Child Victims Act, bringing claims, starting civil suits, and leading to a criminal investigation by the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, which today led to an admission by the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, that they failed to protect victims 1, 2, and 3 of Curtis Waymeyer, and that the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis put their reputation over the safety and well-being of those children. They admitted that. None of this could have happened, and none of the disclosures that we've had the honor to be a part of for the last 3 years could have happened but for the courage of those survivors and the family that was the subject of the horrors inflicted by Waymeyer, enabled by officials. As a result of that settlement, some documents have just been released today, and we have some of those before you. And we're going to share some of those with the public, because this is something that the people need to know. Because what these documents, as we've been reviewing them in the last hour, and some of the documents we've gotten before, to use the words of one of the officials in this document, this reflects a good, old-fashioned cover-up. But it's not just the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis and the top officials there. It goes to the Vatican and the top officials in the U.S. and at the Vatican. And that's why this disclosure and these documents, some of which we're going to share with you today, help illuminate the magnitude of the problem and the recency of it. The Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis started to question why, as we had brought suit against them involving Curtis Waymeyer's sexual abuse of multiple children, and how they started to question Archbishop Nienstedt's role in that. And it's no secret that as a result of public pressure, Archbishop Nienstedt was asked to step aside, but before he did, he was the subject of a lot of scrutiny by us, depositions, and the disgorgement of documents and other evidence which we turned over to the Ramsey County attorney. And in that, there was evidence that showed that Archbishop Nienstedt had a history of a sexual interest in not only Waymire, but other priests, seminarians, and other individuals that went way back. And that information had gone, some of it to Archbishop Flynn, some of which is reported to have been shared by Archbishop Flynn with the prefect at the Vatican, one of the Pope's primary advisors. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Because these documents are reflective of something that is quite broad and quite recent and quite important, I think we should just go to the documents, Trusha, and share first with you some of the background that leads to the preparation of a memorandum that we'll share with you. In November of 2012, Waymire pleads guilty to the 20 counts against him. He's now in prison. In the fall of 2013, the Archdiocese receives allegations of sexual misconduct against Archbishop Nienstedt, including a possible relationship with Waymire. When I asked Archbishop Nienstedt under oath in his deposition about his relationship with Waymire, he refused to answer any questions, saying that he had been counseling him. In January of 2014, based on these suspicions, some of which were shared by the Chancellor for Civil Affairs, Joe Keppers, K-U-E-P-P-E-R-S, and we'll get to the documents that show this, and other officials in the Archdiocese, a decision was made to hire an independent and outside law firm, Green Espel, to investigate these suspicions and these reports that had been made up the line and in the possession of the Archdiocese. So the Archdiocese hired Green Espel to do this investigation regarding Nienstedt, his sexual history, his motivations for dealing with Waymire the way he had, and his relationship with Waymire. Between January and April 2014, Green Espel investigators obtained 10 affidavits describing sexual misconduct by Nienstedt and a personal relationship with Waymire prior to Waymire's arrest. Lay witnesses saw Nienstedt leaving Waymire's rectory early in the morning and visiting in the evenings. Other witnesses at the rectory became aware that Nienstedt would call Waymire, oftentimes presumably for what is described as dates. Other witnesses were priests who described Nienstedt as now interfering with their careers if they refused his sexual advances, and that Nienstedt would reprise against them if they refused his sexual advances. These are priests and seminarians. There were letters from across the country, Michigan and elsewhere, and they were sent to Nienstedt, the investigators found, that were referencing sexual misconduct with seminarians in both Minnesota and Detroit. Green Espel prepared a report of their preliminary findings about midway through this investigation. And they gave this report to the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis officials and the auxiliary bishops, and made these findings known to the Archbishop, correct?
Yes.
Anything else by way of background? Okay. Now let's go to a timeline of events that are reflected in a memorandum. And the memorandum is a multi-page memorandum that kind of recounts the events that had led to this point in time, and what was done. The memorandum, the first page of which is here, and it's from what is now deemed to be the lead investigator, then Lee Pichet, Auxiliary Bishop Lee Pichet. He has been tasked with hiring Green Espel. He's been tasked with overseeing the investigation of his superior, Archbishop Nienstedt, and he's been tasked with dealing with it. This memorandum from a person who's been involved in helping him, the delegate for safe environment, prepares this memorandum, and he sends it to Lee Pichet. Now, in this document, it says to Lee Pichet, copied to Auxiliary Bishop Cousins regarding Archbishop Nienstedt, and the preparer of this document is blacked out. But I will tell you, because it's no secret, the delegate for safe environment at that time was Father Michael Griffith. Daniel Griffith. Father Daniel Griffith. It's blacked out there. The document is dated July the 7th, 2014. And he begins to outline what has occurred and what is occurring here. And he reports that Joe Keppers is the Chancellor for Civil Affairs. That is kind of the legal officer in the Archdiocese. Joe Keppers is also, we believe, the engineer for the financial shenanigans in the Archdiocese bankruptcy, where we believe they have made a serious effort to conceal and hide a number of the assets that amount to up to $1.7 billion in assets. And that Keppers is an engineer of that process, where they're reporting assets of $14 million. Here they write, Joe also told me that some of his colleagues with whom she, that is his wife, worked in the Twin Cities art industry indicated to her that they had knowledge that Archbishop Nienstedt had led a promiscuous gay lifestyle while living and working as a priest in Detroit. Previously, I had heard from a priest of this archdiocese who wishes to remain anonymous that Archbishop Harry Flynn had conveyed his concerns in this regard to Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, then prefect for the Congregation for Bishops in Rome. The prefect for the Congregation for the Bishops in Rome is the right hand to the Pope. Pope Francis. Go to 2. The memorandum is lengthy, and the documents that we have just received and begun to review are lengthy, but for purposes of brevity, I'm going to turn to a page that reflects, and it's page 17, that reflects that the delegate, the writer of this memorandum, is telling Pichet, the delegate for safe environment, is telling Pichet that Nienstedt's, quote, social relationship with Wehmeyer affected his judgment regarding Wehmeyer. In that memo, I included concerns that Nienstedt may have had a social relationship with Wehmeyer, which may have affected his judgment regarding Wehmeyer's past misconduct, as well as the Archbishop's controversial decision to name him pastor of Blessed Sacrament. Given the significant judgment errors in the Wehmeyer case, I believe this to be one of the most serious issues of the investigation, a conclusion also reached by our investigators prior to their withdrawal as counsel. I included this possible relationship with Wehmeyer in my memo. Now, 3 things. Nienstedt had promoted Wehmeyer from administrator to pastor, out of the blue. He had been placed as an administrator because of suspicions of misconduct. But amongst those suspicions, Archbishop Nienstedt on his own promoted Wehmeyer. Thus it's referred to there. It's also reflected in the memo. I included this possible relationship with Wehmeyer in my memo to Green Espel, who are the investigators, because Mr. Keppers had told me that a Blessed Sacrament, in fact, in that capacity, had heard comments on more than one occasion that Nienstedt had had dinner the previous evening with Wehmeyer. Had the Archbishop not followed through with its investigation of the Wehmeyer connection, we would be seen by others as covering up this potential explosive issue. So they want to avoid being seen as covering this up. And so they reflect that they want to do this investigation and hire Green Espel to avoid a cover-up. What happens? Green Espel does this investigation, gives some preliminary reports, and they're halfway through it, I might add. They've got 10 affidavits and 23 leads that they report to Bishop Cousins and to Bishop Pichet, both under Archbishop Nienstedt. And the affidavits, they say, are compelling evidence. And they bring this to the delegate that is in Washington, D.C., who's also called the Apostolic Delegate. And the Apostolic Delegate is Archbishop Vigano, V-I-G-A-N-O. He is also called the Nuncio. The Pope appoints him to be the ambassador to the U.S., to oversee operations in the U.S. and report directly to Pope Francis. It's called the Apostolic Delegate. They make a decision to bring the preliminary findings to the delegate, to Vigano, including the 10 affidavits and the other evidence. After they do, and show that to the delegate. They actually go to Washington, D.C., right?
Yes.
And they invite the Archbishop to go with them, even though he's the subject of the investigation. So Auxiliary Bishop Cousins, Auxiliary Bishop Pichet takes the findings written, preliminarily made of the investigation from Green Espel, and invite the subject of this investigation to travel with them to the papal delegate in D.C. to meet with them. So the three of them go to D.C. And in D.C., as this memo and these documents reflect, they meet with the delegate. And what does the delegate tell them to do, Trusha?
To halt the investigation.
The delegate, on reviewing the information and meeting with Cousins, Pichet, and Nienstedt, says, halt the investigation. Fire Green Espel, stop. Dead. And as I further understood, the Apostolic Nuncio believed that the allegations were not as serious as you and Bishop Cousins had indicated at your meeting, and ordered you to have the lawyers quickly interview Archbishop Nienstedt and wrap up the investigation. The Nuncio said the lawyers, now the Nuncio is the Vatican, the Nuncio said that the lawyers were not to pursue any further leads, including an allegation referenced by many of the affidavits in Detroit that Archbishop Nienstedt may have had sexual relations with a Swiss guardsman in Rome. In response to the Apostolic Nuncio's directives, you and Bishop Cousins, you as Bishop Pichet, and Bishop Cousins sought counsel and responded to the Nuncio in a letter form stating that both of you disagreed with the decision to shut down the investigation. What this means is that once the Nuncio ordered them to stop the investigation, Cousins and Pichet, unhappy with the orders from the Vatican and the Nuncio, wrote a letter back to the Nuncio, to the Vatican, saying, you really shouldn't do this. It looks like a cover-up, because it is. This would rightly be seen as a cover-up. That's there. At that time, in response to the letter that they shouldn't halt the investigation, and Cousins and Pichet saying it would be seen as a cover-up, what happens, Trusha?
Bishop Cousins and Pichet write a letter to the Nuncio, and the Nuncio responds telling them to destroy the letter, to destroy the evidence.
So, in response to the letter, the Nuncio now instructs Cousins, instructs Pichet to now not only just halt the investigation, but to destroy the letter they wrote. Cousins had sent your April letter to the Apostolic Nuncio. The Nuncio, in response, asked you to take back the letter and destroy it. You did not indicate whether you had complied with this request, or perhaps it was a directive. I would like to pause for a moment and visit the gravity of what you had conveyed to Mr. Wallace Jackson, the attorney at Green Espel, and me in your office at the Chancery. The destruction of evidence is a crime under federal law. and state law, and the fact that this request was made of you by a papal representative to the United States is most distressing, as well as illegal. That letter has not been seen or produced to us today from the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, or has not been seen in the investigation in the civil suits that we've been prosecuting for the last 3 years. And so as we speak today, the letter they actually wrote to the nuncio is yet to be at least revealed to us. When we look at the same document, we see the description given to what has been going on here. And we're not talking about 5 years ago. We're not talking about 10, 20, or 15 years ago. We're talking about real time here. Now. To use the words of the writer of this memo, by quashing this investigation and ordering the destruction of the evidence, he states this is a good old-fashioned cover-up to preserve power and avoid scandal and accountability. A good old-fashioned cover-up are the words that he used. The reality of this current matter demonstrates that as the evidence began to come into the Archdiocese from our skilled and independent investigators, apparently some of the Archdiocese and some beyond the Archdiocese were not able to face the reality of the emerging truth and its attendant call for accountability. What has unfolded in the face of compelling evidence amounts to a good old-fashioned cover-up to preserve power and avoid scandal and accountability. And so, gratefully to the many survivors that have come forward, to the power they reposed in us to uncover a lot of things in the last 3 years that had never been seen before, including the files and the depositions, and the power of the survivors to share their stories and their sorrows with us and the Ramsey County Attorney and their investigators, and the arrangement that led to the release of these documents today. We now have a glimpse in real time, and not only of a practice being employed at the present by the Archdiocese that pertains to Waymire, but the motivations behind Nienstedt's conduct and misconduct. And it doesn't just go to the Archbishop, it goes to Rome. The delegate, and directly to the Vatican. And as sad and as alarming as this is information that needed to be shared. And that's why we, having received these documents that now are available to us, began a rigorous review. Trusha, thank you, and to the others that in the last few hours here have been working feverishly to distill this saga we're now able to share it with you. Where do we go from here? More is to be revealed, and as it is, we'll be happy to share that. Because when we speak on behalf of the many survivors who want the truth to be known, and those that would allow this to continue to be accountable. And we have to look back at what Pope Francis has said in the last year about bishops and top officials and their role in this. And in this last year, Pope Francis has said, as we now have focused on the top officials and their role in this, that bishops must be particularly diligent in protecting those who are the weakest among the people entrusted to them. The Pope said in a decree, he said a bishop can be removed from office if he has, through negligence, executed or omitted acts that caused serious harm to others, unquote, be it physical, moral, spiritual, or financial. The decree requires the Vatican to launch an investigation if serious evidence of negligence is found. The bishop will be given the opportunity to defend himself. Ultimately, the Vatican can issue a decree to remove him or ask him to resign. First, the Vatican is promising the people, and Pope Francis is promising the people, that we will investigate. Here we see evidence that what the Vatican did is order the investigators, privately retained, to investigate the Archbishop, to stop the investigation, and to destroy the documents. He also says that they will take action against bishops or top officials who are negligent and prove to be. So, at this point in time, not one official of this Archdiocese has been disciplined, has been defrocked, or has been dismissed from the clerical state, and should be. Archbishop Nienstedt remains a priest in good standing, and as recently as last week was doing masses in California. And while he may have resigned, that is far from discipline. And so I think his removal from the clerical state is required if Pope Francis's words mean anything. The complicity of Auxiliary Bishop Pichet, who's also resigned but has suffered no other consequence, also requires Vatican discipline, defrocking, and or removal from the clerical state, if the Pope's words mean anything. It also begs the question about Cardinal Vigano, Vigano, the papal nuncio, who on getting the report of the investigation orders it to be halted, number one, and then when asked to be reconsidered, orders the destruction of documents. He's a cardinal. He's no longer the nuncio because he retired, I think, a few months ago. But he's still over there in Rome. And if the Pope's words mean anything, he's got to go. We've been sharing information brought to folks by the courageous survivors, and information that has been uncovered for many, many, many years. We share this today in the spirit of no joy, but sorrow, alarm, and sadness as to the recency and the level of deception, not just by the officials of the Archdiocese, but by the officials in the Vatican. And so, calling for definitive action has never meant much, because they've never heeded a call for definitive action, notwithstanding promises for transparency and accountability. But it is our hope, and those of the many survivors, now hundreds of survivors, with whom we have the honor to not only honor their sorrow, but do what can be done to protect us in the future, to make sure that some action definitively is now taken. We represent this family in the Archdiocese cases abused by Waymire, and we applaud their courage. And we represent hundreds of other survivors in this action. But this is a time for serious reflection, examination of this information, and we release this today as the first part of information that we didn't have the power to either have in our possession or the power to release until now, while the criminal investigation and prosecution was underway. Now that it is, this is the first part. But I think a really important part for us to really realize how serious this really is, and the gravity of it, and the magnitude of the good old-fashioned cover-up that goes from this Archdiocese to Rome and continues to this day. And so to the survivors with whom we've stood and worked, we express our gratitude. And because of the efforts of the survivors, the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, in bringing some accountability to bear, some I say, to bear today, we now begin to get some of the documents that really reflect what has been, and we have to do everything to make sure it will not be. And until definitive action is taken against the top Vatican officials who are complicit in this good old-fashioned cover-up, and against the Archbishop, now resigned, and the auxiliary bishops who participated, and any other official implicated in this definitively by this investigation and revelation, we cannot rest, and we will not, nor should any of us. And so this is a call to action, and we all have to put it on. It's not just the survivors anymore. It's not just the community of faith anymore, and it's certainly not just us. It's all of us that need to bring this to bear. And with that, I have nothing more to say today other than to express our gratitude to all of the survivors that have been coming forward, that have the courage to speak truth and share their sorrow and their secrets, so that secrets like this that have long been covered and covered up time and time again are now becoming more known. And today is just one day, and there are more days to come. But today is a call for action, a call for reflection, a call for honest assessment of what this really is, and to have the truth known. and a call to action. So Pope Francis, if your words mean anything, just do it. You have the power. The evidence is before you. Do it. Because if you do, it will send a message across this country and across this community and across Western civilization. This is intolerable. And you have the power, and it's about time, and this is the time, and this is the chance to do it. So just do it. And when we say that, and when I say that, I speak with the power and the truth of not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of survivors across the land that need truth for there to be any help in the recovery and to get any comfort that actual children like those abused by Waymire and permitted to have been by Nienstedt are no longer in peril, because there is no comfort until they know, and we know, it's safe. Thank you to the survivors and to those that contributed to the beginning of this release. There'll be more to come. The documents we have here, we just received in the last few hours, and we've tried to lay out for you what we think is a thematic overlay of how grave this is and what the magnitude of it reflects. With that, we'll take questions.
Jeff, what do you make of the county attorney's decision to drop the charges? Do you think that's sufficient? I mean, he said he got more out of this settlement than he would out of any kind of court order, but I mean, what you just described makes it sound like justice is not being served.
We view the county attorney's arrangement with the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, to be a giant step forward. And the reason we do is, number one, they met with the survivors of Waymire and the entire family and discussed with them what they needed and wanted. And what they needed and wanted was some acknowledgement from the Archdiocese that the Archdiocese was responsible and that Archbishop Nienstedt was responsible and the officers of the Archdiocese were responsible for allowing Waymire to have not only access to those kids, but to have abused them over several years. And that acknowledgement came from that deal. So we're supportive of it. The second part of that arrangement that is so critical is if it hadn't been made, we wouldn't be here today. And I wouldn't have shared any of this with you. Because some of this, if not most of this, has yet to be known. But now that it is known, we can all look at it. And we can see the unvarnished truth and the horror that is being practiced as we speak. And because of that, here we have it. And here we're able to assemble and to know, to see, to reflect, and to call to action, and to not tolerate this stuff. So I know that the family with whom we've been working for years and with whom the county worked on this investigation and the other survivors are taking great comfort in this, and I'm taking great comfort in the fact that this is now revealed. And the responsibility for it, and both on the front end and the back end of the cover-up, also lies at the Vatican, because until they act, until they take definitive action, not just words, pledges, and promises, but definitive action that either puts these bishops behind jail, behind bars, and removes them and defrocks them from the clerical state, this will continue. And we've been saying that for years. So we approve.
So why did the charges need to be dropped for the documents to be revealed?
Well, you know, the question is, why did the charges need to be dropped? And what I can say to folks about that is that when you make an arrangement, a plea arrangement, you give something to get something. What they got here for these survivors and for all the survivors is a trove of truth that has just begun to be revealed today. And in the days ahead, you will see, and I expect not tens of thousands of pages of documents, but perhaps as much as 100,000 pages of documents. And what we shared with you today were some of those that we thought most critical and relevant in both time and scope. And so that is a triumph of truth and a triumph for transparency. That counts for a lot.
Jeff, when did you first see the memo that you referred to, written by Father Griffiths, and what was your reaction? Yeah, that is.
I first saw it today, and my reaction, I stopped being surprised long ago. I even stopped being shocked. But I felt and feel a mix of reactions. The first is that I knew and know how it works, and that all roads of concealment and cover-up lead to Rome. And when I saw documentation of the very thing that I knew they had done or were doing, both under our noses and under the radar, gave me some comfort that we could now have some truth known. And I felt some relief. I also feel disgusted. And angry. But it's not a surprise.
Jeff, help me understand how the survivors come to an understanding that for them justice does not mean that anybody has been disciplined, defrocked, charged. Nobody has in this organization has been held responsible. So how do you culminate and marry the fact that there is justice, but there is nobody held responsible?
Well, I think the question is how do survivors, what do the survivors really want when it comes to justice? And I think that the answer to that question that is often asked, and it's easy for us to answer because we work with survivors every day and that's all we do and it's all we've done for 30 years, is that they want first to know that children will be protected. And they want to be able to do something to do that. And that's why they bring actions. And that's why they expose offenders and those that protect them. And that gives comfort. And then when they say, well, what do you want by way of justice? Really what they want and what we want and we share is the truth to be known. Because once it's known about how it was, it makes it less likely to be in the future. That's why today's important. That's why these documents are important. And that the truth, once that's known, gives us and the survivors some comfort because we believe that once known, it's less likely to be repeated. But justice requires also action. And that means accountability to those responsible. And that's why the call to the papacy and to the Vatican to take action against the top officials, including Nienstedt, Pichet, Pagano, and even the prefect, Cardinal Ray in Rome. And action taken against any and all of them for the survivors is definitive accountability. And until there is any accountability or definitive accountability, It continues. And that is what counts.
So did they get justice even though there was not what you described?
No, this is the road to justice. This is far from it. But this is progress. This is progress, because now we have some more truth. And we have truth to make this call today, to share what is being known, and also to exhort the Vatican, and we'll shame them if we will have to action. It's progress. That counts. And that comforts. Any other questions? Thank you all.